Dear students, in this class we discuss what is known as Giffen's paradox. Giffen's paradox. If X is an inferior good, if X is an inferior good, dou X by dou I is less than 0. Less than 0. And remember this, the total effect is dou X by dou Px is equal to dou X by dou Px du 0 minus dou X by dou I into X. This is negative. In the normal case, it is negative. Both are negative. So, total effect is also negative. Price and quantity demanded is negatively related. This is because dou X by dou I is negative. Sorry, in the case of normal goods, dou X by dou I is greater than 0. But in the case of inferior goods, dou X by dou I is less than 0. So, the sign of the total effect is indeterminate. That is, dou X by dou Px is total effect. The sign of this total effect is indeterminate. It can be positive or negative. For example, if dou X by dou I is less than 0, negative, into negative, this becomes positive. And if this positive value is greater than this negative, this can be positive. Otherwise, it can be negative. So, the sign of the total effect is indeterminate. It can be positive or negative. So, it is possible that, and remember this, substitution effect is always negative. That is known as Slutsky's theorem. Substitution effect of a price change is always negative. Income effect is positive. So, positive income effect in the case of inferior goods, positive income effect can be large enough to produce perverse effects, so that dou X by dou Px can be greater than 0. If this positive income effect is greater than negative substitution effect, it will produce the perverse effect that dou X by dou Px is greater than 0. Instead of the demand curve negatively sloped, in such cases, it becomes positively sloped. As price of X increases, quantity of X also increases. That is a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded of X, and this is known as Giffen goods. This is known as the Giffen goods. Now let us see this in the form of a graph. Initially, I by Py, I by Px1, I by Px1. Initially, I by Px1, and suppose that equilibrium occurs on U1 at point A, where quantity is x1. Quantity is x1. Quantity is x1 when price is Px1. When price is Px1. x1, price is when quantity is x1, when price is px1. Now, let me slightly modify. x1 when price is px1, u1. Now suppose that price of x increases to px, price of x increases to px2. px, so I by px2, and px2 is greater than px1, px2 greater than px1. Now, as we have discussed in the previous class, substitution effect is obtained by a parallel, that is movement from point A to point B. Substitution effect reduces quantity from x1 to x2. That is, substitution effect reduces quantity from x1 to x2. This is the substitution effect. But income effect is very strong, so that when the real income is reinstated, our consumer moves to point C, where quantity is x3. When price of x increases from pre-x1 to px2, quantity increases. So we have a positively sloped demand curve. Always remember the case of increase in price we have discussed in the last class. Initially equilibrium at A, substitution effect reduces quantity to x2, but income effect is very strong. This is income effect. So that income effect is much stronger than the substitution effect, so that quantity demanded increases from x1 to x3. Although such cases are very rare, such cases are possible. It was first pointed out by English economist Robert Giffen, who claimed to have observed it in the 19th century Ireland. Robert Giffen is claimed to have observed it in the 19th century Ireland. In the 19th century Ireland, when there was an increase in the price of potatoes, there is an increase in the consumption of potatoes. When there is an increase in the price of potatoes, there is an increase in the consumption of potatoes. And if x is potatoes, dou x by dou px is greater than 0. This was observed by Robert Giffen in the 19th century Ireland. And potato is a large part of the expenditure of a family in the 19th century Ireland. And dou x by dou I is less than 0. Potato is an inferior good. Dou x by dou I is less than 0. And expenditure on this potato is a large part of income, and an increase in income as dou x by dou y is less than 0 lead to a decrease in, as it is an inferior good, as income increases, consumption of potato decreases and consumption of meat increases. And an increase in the price of potatoes due to shortage of potatoes results in a decrease in real income, with a decrease in the demand for meat and increase in the demand for potatoes. Potato constitutes a large portion of households or consumers' expenditure. So, as there is an increase in the price of potatoes, there is a substantial reduction in the real income. So, what happens is there is a decrease in the consumption of meat and an increase in the consumption of potatoes. So, dou x by dou px is greater than 0. As price of potatoes increases, quantity of potatoes also increases. And on substitution effect is still negative. That is, this part is again negative. As the price of potatoes increases, potato will be substituted for meat, and increase in px, that is, on substitution effect negative means increase in px reduces the consumption of x, holding u constant, but income effect is positive. And in the case of income effect, x is inferior, which results in positive substitution, income effect. Potato is an inferior good, so positive income effect offsets negative substitution effect. And in the figure, the positive income effect completely offsets or dominates the negative substitution effect, so that as px increases, qx also increases. What I say is, potato is an inferior good. Dou x by dou y is less than 0. Remember that always. And a significant proportion of the income is spent on potatoes. So, when the price of potato increases, there is a substantial reduction in real income. So, what happens is, as dou x by dou y is less than 0, this quantity is negative, and its income effect is positive. So, as it is clear from the analysis, a commodity will become Giffen goods if and only if substitution effect is positive and very large. And for this substitution effect to be very large, a substantial amount of income should be spent on that commodity. If the proportion of the income spent on the commodity is very small, then substitution effect will be weak. Law of demand still holds. So, a commodity becomes Giffen if and only if a substantial amount of income is spent on it. So that if the price of that commodity increases, there is a substantial reduction in real income, so that he will not be able to purchase meat. His consumption of potatoes will increase. And that will give us the positively sloped demand curve as it is given in this graph. This is the case of Giffen's paradox. So, in terms of income effect, goods are classified into normal and inferior. In terms of price effect, it is ordinary and normal, ordinary and inferior and Giffen. That is the correct classification. And the classification as ordinary and normal, ordinary and inferior, and ordinary and Giffen is based on the sign of substitution effect and income effect. If both are negative, ordinary normal. If income effect is positive but weaker than substitution effect, it is ordinary and inferior. Then substitution effect is weaker than income, or income effect is stronger than substitution effect, and the opposite sign, then it is inferior and Giffen good. That is the classification.